2002, Bryan was selected for a 3-year leadership rotation in Space and Airborne Systems, Consolidated Manufacturing Center in Forest, Mississippi. As the site HR manager, he rotated back to El Segundo to support a variety of functional and program vice presidents at SAS. At the end of 2008, Bryan was selected for his current role and relocated with Raytheon from Southern California to Waltham, Massachusetts. Probably butchered that one too, didn't I? Prior to coming to Raytheon in 1999, Bryan worked 8 years in the healthcare industry, providing support and positions ranging from staffing representative to regional HR director. During this period of time, Bryan worked for FHP Healthcare, Talbot Medical Management Company, Med Partners, and CareMore Medical Management Company. In total, Bryan has 21 years of experience in human resources and is committed to his professional passion to corporate diversity. He has launched 2 diversity groups within Raytheon, the GLBT ERG and
Segundo.
and the Diversity Council in Forest, Mississippi. He has served as the HR liaison for 2 employee resource groups, ERG, and currently serves as the president of Raytheon's GLBT ERG in the Northeast. Let's see. Bryan received a full athletic scholarship from the University of Oklahoma, where he received a bachelor's degree in sociology. And let's see. Yes. But very well done. Now, oops, I just need that one. I'm sorry. Martha Holt is an attorney based in Providence. She has started her career in the litigation department of Edwards and Angel, Palmer, and Dodge in Providence. At EAPD, Martha focused on complex business and probate litigation. Martha spent 2 years in Massachusetts working as a prosecutor for Middlesex District Attorney's Office. She later joined Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island as an in-house counsel. Currently, Martha heads up the Information Assurance Department at BCBSRI, where she ensures compliance with privacy and security laws. Martha has chaired the LGBT committee of the RI Bar Association, and is a member of the Bar Association's governing body, and helped form Lawyers for Equality and Diversity, LEAD. Martha is also chairwoman of Marriage Equality Rhode Island. So I'd like to start by having you each say a little bit about your experiences in your area and what you're passionate about. You can just pick up the mic.
So one of the interesting things about getting into the workforce and having, overseeing career development at the company, both domestically and internationally, I get to see how people enter into the workforce, how their initial experiences are, how they grow within the workforce, and how that generally their identity changes as they go through the working world. And with me, I had a little bit of a challenge because my sexual identity was very, very different than my workplace identity. I was closeted for quite some time. I was about 32 when eventually I had enough pride in myself to feel comfortable in sharing my life and sharing who's now my husband with my coworkers. And what's interesting is that I only excelled in my career. I did this bar graph that or scattergram that kind of showed how my progression went when I eventually came out in the workplace. And how my career kind of accelerated from medium success to more success and progression within the organization. And it did take a little bit of a dip when I went to Mississippi. there is a lot of prejudice still there. And this was back in 2002 when I, at the end of 2002, when I hit the airport there in Jackson. And one of the things I truly realized that my passion for diversity could carry over in the facility there in Mississippi, but more on a general level. I didn't hide who I was, and it was kind of interesting. After my 3 years there, people actually told me that they knew I was gay, and it was no big deal because I didn't make a big deal about it. And so, I shared my husband with my coworkers and everything. It's more about who I was as an employee versus what I am. And so, that's a big message to send out there, because it's your identity in the workplace is going to really set aside any prejudices that people are going to be having out there, because they are looking at you as a person, as an employee, as a manager, as a successful career person, versus a gay person or a lesbian or transgender person. So, and I just have, because Raytheon is such an excellent company for diversity, I've just carried on my passion from that point forward.
So I really fell into this kind of advocacy work. It wasn't something that I had intended on doing when I started out my career. I did go to law school, and I did intend to advocate, but I thought I would be advocating on behalf of my clients. When I got into the workplace, I suddenly realized that, yes, that's very important. It's clearly what I get paid to do. However, I needed to start advocating on behalf of myself and on behalf of other individuals that were similarly situated. I joined Edwards, Angell, Palmer, and Dodge as a brand new graduate of law school at a time when nobody in that rather large firm was out. And it shocked me that that was the case. And so I was fortunate, and it's just amazing how life kind of gives you these gifts and opportunities, and you really need to capitalize on them. But I was fortunate that one of my peers that came into the firm at the same time that I did was also gay. And so he and I really were able to band together and to work within the construct that is at the law firm and open up doors for ourselves, but also for other colleagues that for some reason or other had decided that they could not be out in their workforce. One of the first things that we did was we asked the firm to buy a table at the HRC event that's held every year up in Boston. And then we decided we'd just send an invitation out to every single person in that law firm. And it was as a result of that that we were able to get some traction, and we got some attorneys to come out and actually join us at that table. And that's really what that got me going in this field and really advocating on behalf of other diverse individuals. It's not what I get paid to do. I get paid to be an attorney. I get paid to do compliance work. So it's in addition to my normal duties, but it's certainly something that I am very passionate about, and I feel like there's a need to continue the advocacy work, mostly within the construct of the organizations that I do become part of.
I have some questions prepared for both Bryan and Martha, and as they answer the questions, if you have a question for them, just simply raise your hand and I'll go around with the mic so you can ask it. And let's see. The best way to do that is once they're answering, you'll see me move and I'll be there. So Bryan and Martha, can you tell us about the diversity practices that you see now in the global business, as well as what practices you see coming, I guess, in the future?
It's changed dramatically. I've been in HR for 21 years, and so being in HR and seeing the changes that have taken place within the diversity field has been really fantastic. Whereas a lot of you will be entering in and really enjoying a very, very different environment. Today we have about 86% of the Fortune 500 companies that have their EEO policies that support sexual orientation, and it's really, really fantastic. You have a large population of those Fortune 500 companies that are receiving 100% on the HRC Corporate Equality Index. And so it's, when you walk into it, regardless of what your diversity perspective is, you're getting an opportunity to really experience something that I've had the pleasure to see develop over the past several years. From a global standpoint, it's very, very different from one country to another. I could have an opportunity tomorrow to go be an HR manager in Saudi Arabia. My husband has told me that he's not going to wear a burqa, so and they're not that open when it comes to GLBT folks in Saudi Arabia. So I probably won't go there, and plus I'm not a big desert person. But in other countries, you have, in the UK, in Australia, a little less in Australia, but in Germany, there's a little bit more of openness and understanding for diversity issues. So it's really been a fantastic journey. And I know all of you, as you move into the workforce, if you're already in the workforce, as you have an impact on that workforce, you'll have a tremendous impact on taking it forward.
And I would absolutely echo the concept that diversity has come an incredibly long way, particularly, I would even say, in the last 10 years. Many state laws protect sexual orientation, and several are joining on with gender identity, and that would mean that prevents discrimination in the workplace. I think that the larger companies definitely get it. They understand that the market forces are such that really they need to jump on the diversity bandwagon. A lot of times companies are, particularly if they sell commodities to other businesses are looking for diversity of their vendors, and so they're really paying attention to those numbers. I'm not sure that the LGBT population is entirely embraced in that concept, despite the fact that the laws are there protecting us. There's a learning curve there that we're not quite as the place where I think we all want to be. But that really comes back to knowing what's out there in terms of your rights, knowing what your opportunities are, and at the end of the day, really finding a place of employment that works for you. Because from my personal experience, if you excel at what you do, and you do a great job, and you get the job done for your companies, it doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, or that you have a different gender identity than other folks. It really comes down to, are you doing the good job that you're supposed to do? And for me personally, that means that I have to go to an environment that's going to embrace me for who I am, and that I don't have to hide who I am from my coworkers and from my managers. And so part of it is still, I think, very much a work in progress, but I do think that the foundation is squarely there, and the progress is headed at least in the right direction, from my experience.
And just one more thing: never assume, just because Raytheon, diversity is part of our business. Diverse perspectives, inclusion is a business imperative for our company to be successful. Not all companies take that perspective. I have a friend who just moved out to Massachusetts from St. Louis, and he's working in a small company. He's a nuclear engineer, and he's been in his position for about a month and a half now, since he moved out here. And they don't have any diversity programs at that company. A lot of the smaller companies, they're not really as sophisticated when it comes to diversity programs. But don't assume that just because they don't have a diversity program, or they don't talk about such issues in the workplace, that the people, the coworkers, the teams that you're working with are going to shun you because of that. he came to a realization when David, my husband, and I sat down with him, and he was talking about, he didn't want to come out at work. He wasn't even wearing his wedding ring. He just got married. He wouldn't wear his wedding ring at work because he didn't want people to ask questions. And we told him, but you're there as an employee. You're there to really show them how excellent their company can be and take it to the next level. What happens beyond that is really ancillary. It's, if someone's going to ask you, oh, you're married. Who is she? Which happened to me a lot in Mississippi. And just be honest. Just say that, well, actually it's a he, and in his case, his husband still lives back in St. Louis. And we just told him, just be honest, because that's going to open up a lot of people's eyes in seeing people and interacting with people that will give them a new perspective about diversity.
Can you talk about what's different about coming out in the workplace as opposed to coming out in a university campus?
So, you know what? Honestly, I feel like I'm dating myself, and I'm old, and I apologize for being that awkward person that's suddenly realizing that she's no longer young and hip any longer. But I feel like it's such a different environment now than when I went to college. I'll candidly admit I wasn't out in college when I went into the working field. That's really when I transitioned. I was, able to call it for what it was and be who I was and be absolutely fine with it. I think now that you see people coming out at increasingly younger ages, that there obviously is a support system that is needed so people can come to that realization and be comfortable with it at a much earlier age. That my hope is that the university environment is more embracing of it, because they really do need to cater to the population that is attending them. I know that there have been difficulties at many different campuses, and that the struggles that exist in the campuses, the campuses are not necessarily free from the struggles that we might experience in other parts of our lives. And so, on that level, I do think that there are many similarities. It's really about knowing the environment that you're in, knowing that you're proud of who you are, and understanding that you don't want to hide it from anyone. Those are the same realizations that I would imagine you would have on a campus as well as in a workplace. And then just living your life and being okay with it, and making sure other people know that you're okay with it at the end of the day.
And to add on to that, it's interesting because in both the college environment and the work environment, we choose which school we go to. We choose which company we want to work for. And hopefully when we make those choices, we're making educated choices. We're looking at the demographics of a company. We're looking at the diversity programs that a company has to offer. We're looking at a school such as University of Rhode Island that has a multicultural center and fabulous programs. And so it does take research to ensure that you are going into a company that, number one, you're going to feel comfortable with, but also a company that you're going to be successful with, and balance out those choices. Everything is a choice. Everybody in this room has control over the future and has control over where they're going to go in life. So don't let go of that choice that you have, because the more companies that don't have strong diversity programs out there realize that the folks coming into the workplace, they're making educated decisions as to what company they're going to be going to. And if they don't have a 100% score on the HRC Diversity Corporate Equality Index, then they're going to go somewhere else. And it's going to be a wake-up call for these organizations.
So, are you familiar with the HRC's corporate index? Is that No. Okay, so the HRC Corporate Index, so HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, they go out and they have a survey that corporations can voluntarily answer. And they rate corporations on their policies related to the LGBT populations. I would strongly recommend that folks go onto their website. They've got a ton of resources, hrc.org. And you can certainly, it's a great place to research companies. One of the limitations of that index is that it is geared towards for-profit organizations. So you're really talking about the larger corporations. For the most part, the smaller organizations don't take part in that. And so there may be times when you find yourselves entering into the workforce or getting a job, you think it's the most perfect job. And suddenly you find yourself having certain struggles, or there seems to be a disconnect in terms of what you would expect their policies would be about the LGBT population. You might have a similar experiences on campus where you select a school that you want to go to, and you might find that there are challenges that you hadn't anticipated. And I have to fall back on my advocacy little pitch here, because at the end of the day, we are all our own best advocates, but also understanding the other resources that are available in your community can go a long way. You're not in it alone. There are a ton of organizations out there that support our community, that want to support you, and understanding who to go to and how we can all come together and work together on this really advances our community as a whole. And so, one hopes that you get to in the workplace, and it's exactly like Raytheon has set up, where it's a very robust diversity program. Blue Cross has a very good diversity program in place. But I can tell you that some of the organizations don't, and a lot of times all it takes is a constructive dialogue and getting people to open their eyes up and getting people to change the way that they've done things. So I just don't want to, it's not all roses out there, but I think, again, that for the most part it's going absolutely in the right direction, and knowing what your resources are can most definitely help you along the way.
Okay, for this next question, I'm going to have to frame it a little bit. The EEOC report, so Equal Opportunity Commission reports. All companies have to collect statistics on the demographics of the people who work there, so that could be reported to the federal government. Schools have to sign off on the report because of Title IX, so they have to show how many men, how many women are utilizing the sports services. And so basically, I'm wondering is, how do companies consider gay and lesbian employees? Are they considering them as minorities under this Equal Opportunity Commission report? I know that as they're attempting to get diversity in the workplace, we're trying to fit people into categories so we can say how many of this person we have, how many of that person. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When it comes to the GLBT community, Raytheon calls it GLBT, and actually we add A on there for ally. But for the GLBT community, it is a challenge, and I'm sure our attorney will dive in a little bit more deeper why. But it is a challenge to collect that information. A lot of companies are skittish when it comes to collecting that data. We do not collect that data. On occasion, if a company is doing an all-employee opinion survey, which a lot of the larger companies do on an annual basis or every other year basis, they will ask demographic information to try to break out some of the data from those employee opinion surveys. However, Martha will probably talk a little better about the compliance piece of it.
So my disclaimer is it's not the area of law that I practice. However, I would absolutely echo the fact that it's not the kind of statistics that companies tend to gather. There is a potential for diversity programs to lose sight of the LGBT communities, and that is not necessarily intentionally done. I think that one of the struggles that diversity programs have is to really demonstrate a business needs to have the diversity programs in there. And so at the end of the day, it's much easier to come up with the numbers for characteristics that people may more prominently display. For example, your gender or your ethnicity. That's certainly statistics that companies tend to pay much closer attention to. It's a moving target. It's not something that I think a lot of corporations do actually capture. I would agree that companies tend to be skittish about it. It's a lot of times people do try to get some self-reported data out there, but obviously it's not very consistent, and as such, people don't rely on it. So it's harder to make the business case for collecting that information. Now, one of the struggles that we have is without capturing that information, it's really hard to tell what's going on with your LGBT communities in a place of employment. Are they leaving your company at an unusually high rate? Are they getting promoted in the same way? It's much harder to track it. Again, it's one of those things that you have to ensure that you brace the company, understand how it works, really kind of work with the constructs that you have, and that's the best that we can do at this point.
Yeah. What could be different if they started to keep track of these things? Is there anything that you see that could become part of a diversity initiative if companies began to see GLBT people in this way?
I firmly believe that companies are always stronger when they embrace all diversities, because at the end of the day, looking at a single problem from a single vantage point is never going to give you the best answer, the best solution. Additionally, particularly when you have community-based aspects to your business. For example, Blue Cross. It services all the populations in Rhode Island. And so in order to best service all of the needs of all of our communities, we really need to keep an eye on the diverse nature of our populations that we serve. And we have to ensure that we keep the LGBT communities in that dialogue. And so I do think that it is in the best interest of organizations to keep an eye on it, to keep a track on it, to be self-reflective in that way, because at the end of the day, a diverse and rich and well-supported employee population is by far going to succeed over those that are left by the wayside.
And keep in mind that when it comes to employees, the company's goal is to attract, motivate, and retain employees. That's their goal. Because in most cases, the employee population are the critical value of the organization and the company. And so I believe that if down the line, the skies open up and the sun shines through and everybody feels comfortable with the idea of tracking a full diversity population, then it's going to help the company attract people through staffing and talent acquisition activities, provide more focus on recruitment activities, both in the professional and the college ranks. And it will also help them build their diversity programs and put the appropriate monies toward those focused areas, whether it's African Americans or Hispanics, GLBT, all the different veterans, disabled people. It'll really shine a big light on what the opportunities are for the organization to retain those individuals.
And you would talk about some of the interesting challenges coming out with your personal relationship, just being married when people just assume you're heterosexual. Can you talk about how being gay in the workforce might be similar and different to those challenges as for a straight person in the workplace?
Well, coming from California, which I believe about 2 years ago, white males became a minority. And so it was interesting because we have a Raytheon Diversity Summit every year, and the focus of the Diversity Summit a couple of years ago was on white males and how white males are kind of becoming slowly but surely becoming the minority. And so it's interesting from my perspective because believe it or not, white males still do get a lot of attention in the workplace. in terms of their professional progression. I'm not going to lie about that. And we're working on the industry, the working world is working on correcting that. But when it comes to other diverse populations, you are dealing with situations whether it is an obvious diverse person, whether they are missing a leg, or whether they are African American, and then you're dealing with a population in the GLBT community where it is often hidden and it's not often obvious. So you are working with a situation where you're working around these assumptions that people create in their mind about you, thinking that I'm a straight HR professional in Forest, Mississippi, versus the prejudice that I saw against African Americans in that facility outright, and how I took actually that assumption that they had of me to create an overall realization by the time I left that facility that we all may look the same or have an assumption about somebody, but don't always assume that that person is the person that you're believing they are like, whether they are whether it's a diversity piece or whether they're a good employee or whether they have a bad attitude in the workplace. All those things that are created by assumptions can create obstacles for anybody.
So I'll piggyback on the theme that I think a lot of workplaces do struggle with the work-life balance as well as balancing family needs versus the needs of the employer. I actually come at it from an oddly strange perspective. I have a 1-year-old son. My wife and I are very pleased to have him welcome into the world. And I am the primary breadwinner of our family. So I think I surprised many of my coworkers when I announced that we were pregnant. Especially, it was funny, some people went over and immediately congratulated my wife and said, "Congratulations, when are you due?" Well, it turned out I was the one carrying our child. And yes, I believe it or not, I'm the butcher, one of the two. So I can see how people might assume that my wife would have been the one to carry. So it was funny to see that all unfold, and how being a lesbian and being the breadwinner, apparently people immediately put on the male gender role on me and expected me to fit into that little box. Well, unfortunately, I like breaking out molds, and I was still wearing the button-down shirts with my little belly popping out and freaking everyone out. It was actually quite entertaining and actually a great experience. But so it really it kind of shattering the boundaries and being open and honest about that dialogue. I think I still freak out some people when I talk about the donor as opposed to the father, because my son is incredibly long and getting really tall, and the donor is ridiculously tall, and my brothers are tall, and I start having that conversation, and you can see some people just don't want to hear about it. Well, don't ask. That's fair enough. Don't ask how the father feels, because I'm going to say that the donor has no idea that my little boy's in the world, but he's given us a great blessing, and I'm very proud of him, and I'm not ashamed of how he came into this world, and I hope one day he will never be ashamed either. So again, it's all a matter of how you approach it, and don't ask the question if you don't want to hear the answer.
Going off that just a little bit, is there any stereotypes that either of you encounter over and over again that you've now had to build up good answers for and comebacks to almost combat or circumvent some of the things that will be asked? I have to admit, so as open and honest as I am about myself, there are situations that I find myself in where people will ask me if I'm married, and I say yes, and I move right along. I just don't want to get into it, depending on the... Usually it's the casual conversation with someone that you're never going to see again. I just don't see the point. On the other hand, I've actually decided that day I'm going to just be honest and share my experiences, and
Oddly enough, I had a very positive experience in the Verizon shop trying to get my cell phone replaced, and the person commented on my wedding band, and I mentioned my wife, and she was just so thrilled that I came out to her, and that was the best experience that she's had with the customer all day. So you never know when you decide that you're going to be open and honest and combat those immediate presumptions that you might actually be helping somebody else along in whatever experiences that they're dealing with that day.
The main thing with me, I have a little bit of an older child. She's 22. I was in a marriage with a woman for 7 years, and so the biggest questions come about her, and people are very, very intrigued about, well, when did you turn gay? And, oh my gosh, that must have, when did you get hit on the head with a pan or something like that? So the most of the conversations surround my daughter, or our daughter, and her mother, and how that whole thing came about. It's been actually wonderful coming out here from California. My husband and I just feel so much more open about our relationship, believe it or not. And you would think California, liberal, land of fruit and nuts. It's just so much more easy to deal with our sexual orientation out here, and people, once the whole conversation comes up, I mean, that whole focus of any conversation suddenly shifts to our relationship. Oh, I have a gay brother, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's been wonderful coming out here and being out here and experience the openness that exists in New England versus what we dealt with in California.
Because it's not always easy to be able to tell if someone is GLBT in the workplace or anywhere else, do you find that in the workplace it's necessary to network twice as much if you are GLBT?
So I'm fortunate enough right now that I'm in a career where I don't feel like I need to network quite as much as I used to. But certainly when I was an attorney, I definitely did the networking circuits. And as it relates to networking, I do think that you, as a professional, do find yourselves going to more networking events, but mostly because not only are you might be finding yourself going to the ones that are related to your profession, but you also want to be in touch with members of our community to kind of share your experiences to strengthen your opportunities. And so I would be going both to the straight-dominated bar association events, and then I would go to the LGBT professional events. And so as a result of my personal needs, I did find that I was networking more than I think my straight counterparts, but it was really driven by my personal desire and not necessarily a need for my career. And so that was my personal experiences. I'm not sure if that's shared across the board with everyone.
Obviously, being the process owner for career development, I am passionate about networking, regardless of what your background is. In terms of the GLBT community, if you have not joined, there's a web-based network at an organization called Out and Equal. It's a workplace advocacy group, and they have a really good social networking site that really gives you exposure to a lot of the companies. Actually, at the end of this month, about 50 Raytheon folks are going to their annual workplace summit in Dallas, and it's really a wonderful experience if you ever get a chance to do that. But when it comes to general networking, it's whether it's within the organization, whether it is outside of the organization that you're working for, whether it's here at campus or in your communities, take advantage of those opportunities to connect with people, to interact with people. it not only gives yourself more confidence about who you are and what you want to be in life, but it also creates a wonderful network of people that you can rely on. And when you do put your profile on LinkedIn, because you're breaking into the working world, you can reach out to these individuals and ask for recommendations and build up that profile on LinkedIn, so that when employers do take a look at you, you feel confident that, oh yes, take a look at the recommendations on my LinkedIn account. So just whenever you get those opportunities to network with people, just take advantage of those opportunities. Passionate.
Currently, there's no federal law that bans discriminating against existing employees based on sexual orientation, at least in the private sector. Are companies challenging discrimination and gearing up to make a change before the law does change?
Well, fortunately, a lot of the laws that protect our communities are existing in the state laws. And so, for example, Rhode Island has, like I indicated beforehand, an anti-discrimination provision that includes sexual orientation as well as gender identity. And so I think what you really are finding is that the corporations are reacting in part to the laws that exist and control them in various of their states, and then just making that a policy across the board. But again, circling back to my point I made earlier, is that corporations are really embracing diversity. I think generally speaking, they understand that diverse employees mean that they actually are a stronger corporation at the end of the day. And so I think you do find, generally speaking, a trend for the larger corporations, at least, to embrace diversity and to be ahead of the curve when it comes to how they protect their employees. A good example of that is the concept of domestic partner benefits in the health insurance arena. We've had domestic partner benefits being extended to employees by their employers for many, many years now, and only in 2003 did you actually see marriage equality in Massachusetts start changing that tide and making it a state-based legal right. And so you do see many areas where the workforce is light years ahead of the laws that would give us the actual protections.
It takes time, and that it does take time for the tide to turn to have those laws take effect. And I think a lot of the employers are really taking the lead on that. For Raytheon, being in the defense and aerospace industry, we were actually the first organization to adopt the policies that we have around protecting those with on sexual orientation or based on gender identity, and we were the first to get that 100% rating from the HRC. And 1 year later, you had a bunch of other different defense contractors jumping in. And so as the bar is set in the private sector with these corporations, you're going to see that bar also getting raised in the state laws and ultimately in the federal laws, and tearing down those walls of protections.
We talked about this a little bit earlier about tracking through the EEOC for payroll and salary differentials. While it's hard to ensure that you're being paid perfectly the correct number for what you do, what is the best way, or what should you do if you think you're part of a pay differential on the wrong end, meaning you feel discriminated against because of who you are?
So that's a tough question, and I recently was a part of a presentation where the director of the Human Rights Commission, I know HRC it's a different organization. It's a Rhode Island government entity that actually enforces anti-discrimination laws here in the state. And he was sharing with us a statistic that a very small portion of their cases actually involve LGBT members of the community. In fact, I believe it's only 1 or 2 a year out of the hundreds of cases that they actually bring against employers for discrimination. And part of the reason that he felt the numbers were so low is because it is so incredibly difficult to prove those cases, mainly because of the fact that the data isn't there to support it. And so they really need to take it case by case and look at anecdotally whether there's inequalities. But even just looking in the room today, people here are having many complex, diverse backgrounds, whether you're a female versus a male, or whether you're of another ethnic minority versus your colleagues. And at the end of the day, not to beat the drum too much, but you have to be your own advocate. There have been times when I've really not liked the way certain policies happen, and I may have volunteered to be a plaintiff in various state law cases. And my colleagues keep on chastising me, saying I'm too darn good at getting companies to do the right thing, that I'd never end up getting on that plaintiff list. And at the end of the day, I hope that each and every single one of you are very good at getting the companies to do what they're supposed to do. Because really, I think changing from within is the best way to get it done, and making people know it's the right thing to do, and for them to do it voluntarily is always better than having to go and bring a case against anybody.
From a HR standpoint, I sit with the comp folks. They sit all around me. They haunt me every day. And if most larger corporations, they have a very structured compensation program in place. They have salary grades. They have, when it comes to hiring new college grads, they usually have a very structured way of determining the salaries, worksheets, other types of calculations. And the challenge you get are the smaller companies that aren't necessarily required to produce an affirmative action plan on an annual basis, or really don't feel like they're monitored as often as the larger corporations by their hiring practices or termination practices or pay practices. So being in mergers and acquisitions, I do a lot of due diligence when it comes to these smaller companies, and their pay practices are so ad hoc that usually there is no method to their madness. I've never seen the discrimination-based pay practices that you make reference to in your question. So I don't think that is as much of an issue as one would think. There's so many factors that go into determining somebody's pay, whether their experience, their education, whether or not they know all the software necessary to perform the job. So it's there's so many variables. It is very hard to determine any form of discrimination.
So if someone is unsure if they're being discriminated against, or they don't know how they're being paid or their salary was made, what advice would you give them to be able to find that out?
Well, there are a lot of tools and resources out there, salary.com, or there's various websites out there that do provide general information about what general populations in a general industry make. They're not as reliable. So if you truly feel, even though you shouldn't be sharing your salary with your coworkers, if you truly feel that you're getting paid less because of discrimination or discriminatory practices, most larger corporations have resources in their ethics office that you can turn to. You obviously have the EEOC to turn to. In California, you have the DFEH, Department of Fair Employment and Housing. So there's a lot of resources you can do research on, and there's a lot of other resources you can report to. But don't assume outright. Do your research, do your due diligence to validate as much information as possible.
How how is the global company environment dealing with the changes in LGBTIQ people's status, protections, benefits, such as marriage, healthcare, taking leave to care for a partner, and even the discriminatory protections or practices we just touched on?
The marriage issue is near and dear to my heart, and it really is a difficult topic for a lot of corporations to grasp. From my experience, it's just a very confusing environment out there. You've got many conflicting state and federal laws, and people simply just don't fully understand it. And when people don't understand it and it's different, it's easier to treat it differently. That's been my personal experience, even if there's no discriminatory intent in doing so. And so it really, I think, would be much more beneficial to definitely the corporations to set the bar on a much more consistent national level, just to make it clearer for everyone else. And so hopefully we are moving towards that kind of a more cohesive approach. But until then, I do think that companies do struggle with how to conform to all the various laws that they do have to conform to.
And I think globally, the companies are truly taking the lead in terms of setting expectations that the government should follow with regards to those types of discriminatory practices. There's still a lot of laws on the books in a lot of different countries that really establish that it's okay to discriminate against people in the GLBT community. And so what you're seeing is the influence of these global companies setting the standard for protections in the workplace that I think are creating a more stronger and more reasonable protections generally in those countries. Canada, for example, I mean, they're so far ahead of us when it comes to protections. And I have a couple friends that live up in Montreal, and they got married way before we did, and they enjoyed that environment and that more open environment that was available out there. So if you do look at working at a company in an international location, study up on the country's resources and really determine whether or not that's a country that you want to work in, and obviously whether it's a company you want to work in.
So what are the most prominent changes that you two have seen as the increasing presence of LGBTIQ people come into the workplace?
Okay, so that obviously stumped the panel. I usually find myself as in all of the companies I work for, and I've gone to many different organizations in the last few years, I tend to find myself in a very small minority. And so it's hard for me to really share any experiences that I've had where I feel like it's really a different environment. I do think that my personal experiences with HR departments, with the diversity program directors, is that the dialogue is much more open now, that people are much more willing to discuss it. I think that we still have a long way to go, but at least, again, the foundation is there and the dialogue has begun. And my hope is when every single one of you enter the workforce that you'll be able to continue that, and perhaps we won't need to have these kinds of panel discussions about it.
One of the things that I really enjoy is working with the other ERGs at Raytheon. That is something that really has developed over the years, not only at our company but also other large organizations that have multiple employee resource groups that tap into various aspects of diversity. So, for instance, when we have a panel about career discussions, we work with the Asian Pacific ERG at Raytheon, or we work with, for instance, we had Eric Alba come speak at Raytheon, who was instrumental in repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and actually stood behind President Obama during the signing of that. He came with with the co-sponsorship from our veterans organization, and so that's something that is very, very important to progress in the future. Are all the groups that have different diversity perspectives working together to really heighten the general aspect of building an inclusive culture at the company.
To what degree do people coming out of college and into the workplace, will they encounter maybe an expectation from their professional career to not talk about who they are, their sexuality in the workplace today?
Yeah, so that's such a personal choice question, I think. There are many challenges that new graduates are facing, particularly based on the economy. One of the concerns that I have is how much choice there is going to be in terms of being able to determine where it is that you will get your first jobs. I can tell you that there are companies that you might apply to that you might not feel as comfortable being out initially. It's a personal choice. Are you comfortable letting that aspect of your personality, be personal and not make it publicly known, so that gives you time to make an impact, to make the connections and get into the companies that you want to get into so that you can actually affect change. There is no one cookie cutter way to go about doing it. I don't think there's a roadmap out there. We're making it up as we go along every single day, but I think you guys have been making it up as you go along every single day thus far, and it's made you successful. It's brought you to university. It's going to help you succeed in whatever it is that you choose to do. And again, there are tons of resources out there. There are other people that have gone through this before. Find out how other people dealt with it, find out what their own experiences are, and do the best that you can in your position.
Yeah, always remember that you're there to do a job. You've been hired to do a job. That's first and foremost. What comes with that is truly a choice, and it is truly a personal journey that you have to take. And for instance, when I was in El Segundo, I was an HR manager for the quality group, and one of the quality folks, union employee, came to me, and he was part of the GLBT group at Raytheon, and I've gotten to know him over the years. And he came to me, was very interested in becoming a technician, an engineering technician, which is a non-bargaining unit position. And he said he was struggling to get that position. Nobody would take him seriously. And then I asked him, I looked him in the eye. I said, "So the lanyard you have on that spells out bitch in beads, do you think that's going to help your reputation in the workplace?" The next day, he was wearing a Raytheon lanyard as opposed to that one that he was wearing. So it's the job that you're going to do, but it's also the reputation that you build for yourself in the workplace, how people are going to view you as a professional employee of that company. And then as you build that reputation, and this is for anybody, as you build that reputation is going to take you skyward to wherever you want to go to. But if you look at yourself and say, okay, be honest with yourself. Look at yourself and say, how is my reputation at the company? As a team player, as an employee, as an engineer, as a box maker, whatever. Be honest with yourself and be introspective and really come to terms with things that you need to change that reputation. Sexual orientation has nothing to do with that.
You both have talked a lot about the programs being put on to educate not only the workforce in your companies, but other programs and conferences. What are the degrees that I guess employees entering the workforce can expect to encounter that in their company?
Another stump the panel. So when it comes to conferences,
yeah, you both.
Yeah, I love conferences. Well, once again, it's a great opportunity to do some networking. Usually eat mediocre food, and but also learn a lot. We, most of the larger companies really support their employees in attending both, technical and non-technical conferences, things that are specifically related to what you do for your job versus things such as going to the Out and Equal conference. And so what those companies do, well, they'll set up a budget that they can spend on an annual basis to send people to conferences. They'll take a look at who are their top employees, who are the employees that they're looking at develop either in their technical skills, their leadership skills, and sending them to those conferences. Don't ever be shy about asking if you can attend a conference. Just make sure that you are prepared to answer what the business case is for you to attend that. And so it's most companies do give their employees the opportunity to do that.
And one of the things that we all have to realize is that up until your graduation from college, the course is pretty much laid out for you. You advance every single year to another grade. You're working right now towards your degree. Once you graduate, you lead your own career. You figure out where it is that you want to go. You figure out how to get there. Nobody is going to hold your hand and show you how to do it. And once you realize that, it's actually really liberating, and you realize that you need to invest in your own personal development, whether that be attending LGBT-based conferences or whether that's professional conferences. And I do think, depending on the career you're in, there are many different reasons why you might be interested in pursuing both of those. But always understand that you're driving your career. So once you do that, I think finding out how the company that you're working for can support that is terrific. But if you need to go out and do it yourself, that's an investment you're making in your own your own self. And I think that's very important.
Many global companies today have economies themselves that are greater than nations, actually. So I'm kind of wondering, going off the education and the conferences, what are the ways that these companies are setting policies that you see for now or the future and promoting educational opportunities for their employees to change society or make the change that they want to see in the world?
That's a good question, actually, to ask during an interview. Maybe not as lengthy, but ask them about what they do to develop their employees. Because keep in mind, attract, motivate, retain. What you want to do is to create the impression during an interview that you are obviously already attracted to the company, but you want to be motivated within the company. You want to stay with the company for a long period of time. So ask the questions during those interviews about what they do to motivate their employees, to train their employees, to develop their employees. And what you're going to see are a lot of these organizations, they either have formal or informal processes in place to develop the employees, whether or not they have a formal tuition reimbursement program, which comes in really handy when it comes to covering costs for furthering your education, whether they do send people to conferences, technical or otherwise, whether or not they have internally things such as brown bag lunches where they train people in various aspects of their workplace, or whether they have summits within the organization to talk about diversity issues. So really think about those three areas of attract, motivate, and retain when you're sitting down during an interview, because that should be really the focus because obviously you don't want to get hired by a company and leave right away. You want to stay there for a while, and you need to find out what's going to keep you there.
No, I was very fortunate when I joined Blue Cross. One of the things that attracted me the most to the company was the fact that it is routinely voted as one of the best places to work here in Rhode Island. And you can really tell that they value their associates because of all of the programs that we actually that are made available to us. So there is tuition reimbursement. We have a very robust internal training program, and they really do try to promote from within. And you know, it's funny. It's such a palpable difference in terms of the level of contentment that people have with their jobs. So if people feel supported in their positions and in their careers, the entire working environment changes. And I think that runs the gamut. So when you are out there and you're trying to find those jobs, understanding really the corporate culture is going to go a long way into seeing whether it's a good fit for you, because not every company is a good fit for you. And really narrowing down and figuring out what that is half the challenge, I believe.
So are potential employees becoming more choosy today for the companies they work for those very reasons? Employees, yes.
Oh, yes. It's a little bit more challenging because of the economy right now. Obviously, 5 years ago it was a little bit better. You could be a little bit more choosy. But I do see the folks coming out of the colleges and universities much more educated when it comes to what they need to be looking for in an organization. So they are asking the right questions, and hopefully you all will be doing that also.
Okay, and what do you both want the audience to leave with today?
Well, I put some giveaway items out there on the table. I don't know if you all got them. Just kidding. At least from my perspective, it is important to realize that you are in control of your destiny. As Martha said, nobody's going to hold your hand. You have to realize that your reputation will mold how people view you, not your gender identity or your sexual orientation. And be an active participant when you do get that opportunity to get involved with diversity programs, because it really is a very, very rewarding experience. And it also, once again, adds to that further networking opportunity that you so need to build those connections within your company.
I really do hope that each and every one of you is able to find a great match for your career, and also to be out and be proud and be an advocate on your own behalf. I really think that we struggle as a community. Rhode Island's a little bit, I think, unique. I grew up in Massachusetts. I am a transplant here, and I've been here for the majority of my professional life. But there are many pockets of our communities, particularly in Rhode Island, where people are still in the closet. I have many colleagues that are legal professionals, and they still don't feel confident enough coming out. It gets kind of lonely out there if your colleagues that you know that they're part of our community, and they're not out and they're not being vocal. Well, what does that really say about us as a community? And I'm really hopeful that that each and every one of you will by entering the professional world, will just inch that bar a little bit closer towards equality. Because we're not there yet. I think we know by the legal constructs that we live in right now, our personal experiences, we're not at full equality. But the more and more of us that come out and are showing that we're talented individuals, we are productive members of the community, and you can't ignore us anymore, the quicker I think we'll get to that full equality stage, and hopefully together we'll be able to do that.
And although that was back in the mid-'80s when I graduated from University of Oklahoma, I was not out at the time. I was struggling as to where I saw my career going with a degree in sociology. I just kind of fell into HR, which certainly was not a bad thing. But never let any obstacles get in your way. Never feel entitled, but never let any obstacles get in your way. Because once you are successful in breaking down those barriers that you see in front of you, you feel in front of you, once you break those down, you've succeeded twice. You've removed something that was blocking you, but you also continue your journey.
I've always thought that whatever we do, we teach who we are, and I really want to thank you both for your positive and affirming messages. Is there any questions you have before we end? Anyone?
You say that Blue Cross is a progressive company. Is there any talk about providing for individuals who work in the state who are covered by Blue Cross for surgery, drugs for those who are transgender?
So the insurance market is a very complex one, and when you talk about state employees, so Blue Cross doesn't have the state contract right now, so I imagine you're talking about the municipalities. And when we talk about the municipalities, the towns and the schools, they're self-funded. And so Blue Cross doesn't actually set the policies for that kind of coverage. The best way for employees to get that coverage really is to talk to their HR departments and sell it at their own employer's place of business. It's not something that's set by Blue Cross policy. As a whole, that's in terms of what is covered and what isn't covered is a very complex topic regardless. And again, I fall back on the fact that each and every single one of us need to advocate on our own behalves. On that note, though, I understand Raytheon recently had a policy change, and I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, we just found out 2 weeks ago that beginning of the year 2012, Raytheon is going to be covering transition surgeries. So we're very excited about that. Very excited about that.
Any other questions? I guess that's it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody.